Welcome back to Football Daily, where today, we're talking about football Twitter. That's right, it's a bit of a lull this week in the footballing world, isn't it? After the international break, before the rest of the European leagues have come back and all the talking points have started, there's not loads to discuss, but football Twitter has been popping with some very, very good debate and some terrible opinions. So I thought I would look at some of the best debates and best opinions on football Twitter and get you guys to send in your own as well. Thanks to everybody that got involved. I've picked 15 of my favourite tweets that I found from the football Twitter community. There was loads more, but most of them, like these, stunk. Now, the original idea for this episode actually came from this very tweet on screen now, from United Cynical. He was replying to M Tactician, who said that Jude Bellingham is going to be what Paul Pogba was supposed to be. Now, United Cynical, obviously not having that, said Pogba was a far better talent than Bellingham, and it isn't even close. And I actually think this is a great debate. Because let's not forget, Paul Pogba at 20, I think he was in his second season of Serie A football, certainly in the team of the season, won the Scudetto, 7 goals, 7 assists, 33 games, an unbelievable prodigy. Maybe at that age, the best young midfielder I'd ever seen. Like, in terms of his physicality, his passing ability, his goal-scoring ability, the ability to dribble and carry the ball past midfielders, it was absolutely Zidane-esque. But let's not forget Juventus as well. They were all conquering at the time, and he was partnered by two extremely experienced leaders. Arturo Vidal, an absolute dog off the ball that was going to put up all of the running numbers you needed, and a quality, classy operator, a true leader, a three consecutive time Serie A player of the season around the same period, in fact, exactly the same period, in Andrea Pirlo. As a midfield three, they were a joke. Pirlo was so good at that time, and Pogba was able to lean on the leadership of players like Vidal and Pirlo and the class of Pirlo and be super expressive. There's no doubt, as a technical operator, Paul Pogba was a freak at that age. Bellingham, I feel like, is slightly different. He hasn't had the Pirlo and the Vidal alongside him at a club like Borussia Dortmund, where he really should have won the league title last year had it not been for that injury towards the back end. Of course, he was the Bundesliga player of the season at 20, something that Paul Pogba wasn't able to do in Serie A at the same age. Now, that's not necessarily a stick to beat Pogba with, because there were players like Pirlo in the same side as him. And Jude Bellingham last season, a monster in terms of goals. 8 goals, 4 assists. I think for me, United Cynical, by saying he was a far better talent than Bellingham, is incorrect. I think at the same age, yes, he was probably a little bit better on the ball, and he was definitely aesthetically more pleasing, Paul Pogba. But I think Jude Bellingham is doing exactly what Pogba was doing at the same age, and he's probably doing it at a higher level right now with Real Madrid. What Pogba did have that Bellingham hasn't necessarily had yet is these sort of X-factor moments of like 30-yard screamer top bins outside of the boot that Pogba was putting in at that age. I think that's only going to come, but I don't think you should judge them just off those little techie sort of moments. I think as full 90s go, Bellingham's ability to just totally dominate games, ground coverage, involved in tackles, just eat up everybody around him, is, it's very, very similar to Pogba at that age in slightly a different way. I think if you want the aesthetic player, you'd side with Pogba. If you want the all-round talent, you'd probably side with Bellingham. It's so close, and to say far better, I'm just not having it. Next up, we've got James Sadler. He said England have to win the Euros. Their talent level is by far the best in the world. Never mind Europe. Literally anything less is a massive failure. Don't agree. Certainly England have a generation right now that can stand against any in the world. Do I think their level is far the best in the world? No. I think England have some exceptional players in their ranks. We can talk about the Euros coming up, and let's focus on that, because really, have England got a better squad than France? I don't think so. I think it's very, very evenly matched. You'd have Mike Maignan in goal to start with, definitely. But in the right-back slot, you would probably have Trent Alexander-Arnold or Kieran Trippier or Rhys James or Kyle Walker. Then you'd have John Stones, for me. Then you would have a French centre-back, no doubt. Probably William Saliba, but you could have Konate, you could have Rafa Varane, you could have Deo Upamecano. You'd have Theo Hernandez at left-back, though, wouldn't you? In defensive midfield, you'd probably have Tchouaméni just over Rice. It's a tight battle. Then I'd have Bellingham, and in the 10, I'd probably have Griezmann over a player like Madison. On the left, you definitely have Mbappe, and then you'd probably have Saka on the right with Harry Kane up front. So I think it's quite even. The French, I think, probably have better depth, certainly at centre-back, maybe in midfield as well with the likes of Eduardo Camavinga. So I think it's really tight between the two squads, France and England, for who's the best in Europe right now. So to say they're far and away the best in the world, when the Argentinians have just won the World Cup looking sensational, Brazil have plenty of depth and talent, I think is an incorrect statement. The pressure on England to win this Euros comes from within. They're going to be one of the two favourites, but we all think they should be playing better football than they currently are. That's the truth. Not necessarily they've got the best hands-down player-for-player squad in world football by a mile. I saw this one from Andy as well. Rogue one. Eddie Howe will be sacked by Christmas. I don't think so. Not for me. I keep seeing people saying this. Some of the boys were saying this on Team Talk, weren't they, at the start of the season. But let's face it, when he took charge, they were 19th. I think they were winless in 11. He's got so much credit in the bank, Eddie Howe, that I think even if they finish 6th or 7th, which in my opinion is the worst that can happen to Newcastle this year, he will still be in charge. And people will say, oh, what about the Champions League? How are they going to be able to cope? I think the squad is pretty deep. There's plenty of cover in multiple positions. But most importantly, the director of football, Dan Ashworth, doesn't have a history of a hire and fire policy. He's fired one manager since he's become a director of football since leaving the FA. And that was Chris Hughton at Brighton. My personal opinion, Newcastle have had by far the toughest start to the season of any side. Going away to Brighton and Manchester City. Man City lost once at home last season. I wasn't expecting Newcastle to get a result in either of those games. They battered Villa on the opening day of the season and then threw the game away, really, against Liverpool. Threw the game. They should have had that wrapped up against 10-men Liverpool. I'm really not worried about Newcastle. This kind of chat about Eddie Howe being sacked by Christmas, I think is just miles wide of the mark. I think they're going to have decent runs in the Cups. I think they're going to be a nightmare to play against in the Champions League, maybe finish 3rd in that group, and finish 6th, which, again, will keep Eddie Howe in a job. Luke Ellis has an interesting one. High intensity and pressing styles are making football way worse as a spectacle. I kind of agree with this. I think that football has lost a bit of the artistry and magic of the early noughties, where individuals could really thrive. Now it's much more system-based, it's way more templated, when teams build up from the back, how teams strategize is very much first and foremost, whereas in the noughties, when I was really growing up and starting to love football, I can remember individualistic stars being the key to the game. Whether it was Ryan Giggs running through players. I can imagine Ryan Giggs now, he would probably still be unbelievable, but, because he didn't put up the assist numbers, people were probably saying, look at this fraud. The same with Didier Drogba, who averaged 12 goals a Premier League season across his career. In the middle of his Chelsea career, I think he had a season where he scored 5 goals. If that happened now, people would be like, oh, look at this fraud. But he's not. These are Premier League greats we're talking about. Maybe even the same for Zidane, man. In 99-2000 season, Zidane put up 1 assist in league play. Could you imagine if KDB put up 1 assist in league play? People would be onto him. But because of how these players play, it was much more pure. I feel like the tactics and the sort of pressing, like Luke says, have changed the way we view football to a level. And, we did the ranking on Saturday Social recently with Kevin De Bruyne, and KDB was saying the exact same. He had Zidane as his greatest ever midfielder because it was a much more pure time of playing football. Now, it's much more rigid, it's much more tactical, it's less focused on individual brilliance. CFC Jmax says that Spurs are the most exciting team to watch in the league, coming from a Chelsea fan. You've got to enjoy something if you're a Chelsea fan, haven't you? But for me, no. I still think the most exciting team to watch in the league right now are Brighton, to be honest with you. They are crushing in every metric, scored the most goals in the league, expected goals. They are stunning to watch in terms of playing out from the back. We've just spoken about template football. Brighton at least doing it in an exciting way. Watching Verbrugen on the ball, Lewis Dunk on the ball. It's really, really fun to watch. And the forward line is just so exciting. Matoma, Ferguson. We still haven't seen Fatty. I'm so excited by him. Tottenham definitely playing good football right now. And I think we say they're the most exciting team to watch in the league because of how low the expectations were last season. They certainly play some of the most attractive football. But I think Brighton have to be the most exciting team to watch in the league right now. Maybe even Brentford are up there. Tottenham are fun, But for me, it's RDZ. Salted Seagull, obviously touching on Brighton, says that they haven't overperformed. Our key players, Dunk, Gross, etc., are just the most underrated players in the league. I mean, yeah, obviously. Is anybody saying Brighton are overperforming? Like, I think people just expect this from Brighton and this Roberto De Zerbi side. They are stunningly good. They're stunningly good. Nobody underrates Mitoma or Ferguson or Lewis Dunk anymore. I think maybe one of the most underrated players in the league, Pascal Gross, he even got a call up to the German national team squad this week. I don't think people underrate Brighton anymore. Everybody just loves them. Billy Gilmore maybe could fit into that category. I think he's having an amazing start to the season. Looks like he's going to just straight away slot in and eat up those minutes that Caicedo and McAllister have freed up. But I think the rest of them, like Salted Seagull mentioned, Duncan Gross, everybody knows how good they are. Hunter Randolph said, James Madison should be starting as England's 10. Probably. I mean, the start to the season, it's hard to argue with that. 2 goals, 2 assists for Spurs already. Looks like their key man. The captain, when Heung-min Son's not available as well. He's unreal. The issue for me, I think against smaller sides, definitely. You could play a midfield of Rice, Bellingham, Madison. But against teams like a Spain or like a France, where you're not necessarily going to have all of the ball, I don't think I would play Madison over Bellingham. Because Bellingham, let's have it absolutely right, is playing as a 10 for Real Madrid. He's basically a shadow striker for Carlo Ancelotti. He gets in the box so much. He's devastating around the edge of the box that you're really in a shootout between Bellingham and Madison for the 10 against a decent side. And then you can play Rice and another screening midfielder in there, whoever that's going to be. Because I just don't want to see Bellingham on the edge of his own box. I want him sitting on the edge of somebody else's. And if it's a choice between those two, I just come down the side of Bellingham. I think he is, probably the best English talent I've seen since Rooney. And that's saying something, man, because Rooney was the most frightening player I've ever seen kick the ball at 18 years old. Seriously. Freddie Guarin says that Van Persie had a better 2-season run than any striker in the world in the last decade in the 11-12, 12-13 period. Now, of course, they were 2 outrageous seasons. 48 games, 37 goals for Arsenal, 13 assists, I think 30 in the Premier League, PFA Player of the Year as well. And that was that dogging Arsenal side as well that lost 8-2 to Manchester United. Not an awful lot of quality in there. The season after, of course, he joined United, won the Premier League title, 26 Premier League goals, 15 assists. He was, as an all-round player, RVP, one of my favourite footballers to watch in the league. Incredible. So 2 years there of absolute elite running. I think other names in the mix here, Falcao, obviously Benzema recently, you'd have to put him up there as well, wouldn't you? Diego Costa in that period. But I know that the couple of seasons from Van Persie are amazing, but surely it has to be Lewandowski, man. Like, I'm discounting Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi because, Messi definitely played wider. Ronaldo towards the back end of his career was effectively a 9. But surely Lewandowski, 1920 to 2021. Like, I think it has to be, really. Like, he should have won the Ballon d'Or 2021. 1920, obviously, 47 games, 55 goals. He won the treble. The season after, he breaks Gerd Muller's record for amount of goals in a single Bundesliga season, scores 41. Should have won the Ballon d'Or, but it was the COVID year as well, where he was just robbed of it. I think those 2 Lewandowski seasons, a treble win, 41 goals in a domestic campaign, to break every record that's ever happened in Germany. I know that RVP was great, but I'm siding with Lever. Do you know what? I had literally forgotten Luis Suarez as well. I've just remembered Luis Suarez. I'd have him competing with Lewandowski, maybe even above Lewandowski. For that 2 season, the treble win. And then the season after, when he scored 40 La Liga goals, 59 in all competitions, was definitely the best striker on the planet. So tenacious, so technical. Yeah, I mean, how the hell did I forget Luis Suarez, man? Ali says, Rhys James is the most overrated fullback in the world. Hasn't produced a full season of top form, either due to team performance or injuries. The full potential of James is extremely high, but his injuries have set him back. I believe having him over Trent and Walker is unfair. I don't think he's the most overrated fullback in the world. Overrated, for me, suggests that people think he's really good and he's actually really bad. Rhys James is not really bad. We can all see and have watched Rhys James play football and tell you he is exceptional. Like, nobody is overrating Rhys James because everybody thinks he's good, and he is good. Is he one of the most injury-prone fullbacks in world football? Sure. 17 separate injuries since making his Chelsea debut, and he hasn't really been able to put up kind of playing time that we saw the season before last when he was involved in 14 goals. Last season, nowhere near enough. But to call him overrated, I think is just flat out wrong. He's not overrated, he's just injured. People rate him correctly. Luca says Klopp is better than Pep. In their first 6 years as Premier League managers, Pep spent 450 million more than Klopp, yet Klopp won a Premier League and a Champions League and was a point from winning another Premier League. Are you telling me an extra 450 million couldn't have won Liverpool 2 more points in those years? Something tells me he might well be a Liverpool fan. Not for me. I think Pep is the greatest manager ever. And I do think he's overtaken Sir Alex Ferguson with his second treble win. For me, he was behind Fergie up until last season, but to win and become the first manager of all time to win the treble at 2 different clubs, I think puts you on a whole different stratosphere. I think not only is his silverware now incomparable, but I just think his effect on the wider footballing world is basically unbeatable at this stage. From top to bottom of English football has been changed since Pep Guardiola came to the league. The same could be said of football in La Liga and Germany. How he had that 2010, 2011 sort of Barcelona side playing, in my opinion, was the greatest club team of all time. So we're talking about a manager here who's won 2 trebles, is the most influential coach of the 21st century for me. And not only that, but he's produced the greatest club side ever. I know that Klopp has done a miracle for Liverpool with the budget he's been given, but we are talking about the greatest of the great in Pep Guardiola. And I just don't think, as good as Klopp's been, he quite stacks up to what Pep has been able to achieve as a wider footballing brain. Reviews by Mkwasa says Neymar is better than Ronaldinho, and it's not even close. Not for me, Jeff. Not for me. Obviously, Neymar, sensational. 2 La Ligas, I think 5 league titles with PSG, and probably the only footballer I saw of the 2010 to 2020 period that for one single season was actually better than Messi. And obviously he does have the treble to show for it as well, doesn't he? He was unbelievable. He's been in Europe for 10 years, or had been in Europe for 10 years before he moved to Saudi Arabia, of course. But Ronaldinho for me, and maybe this is something intangible, will always be the better player. I know that he only won 2 La Liga titles and 1 Serie A. If you stack up the pure silverware Neymar's won, the goals he's scored, then he does take it. But Ronaldinho as an influential force, a Ballon d'Or winner, a World Cup winner, and the way he was able to play football back in that time period, I just remember thinking and looking at him and being like, what am I watching? Like, what is going on here? This is crazy. And obviously Neymar has had those moments, but he doesn't have that sort of iconic figure of Ronaldinho. Everything about Ronaldinho, from his touch to his hairband to the way he dressed, like, it was like iconic. And I just don't think Neymar has that iconic nature. He's obviously an incredible player, Neymar, and I'm not writing him off here, but for me, it will always be Ronaldinho. I think the Ballon d'Or and the World Cup also help my arguments. I know Neymar's top Brazilian goal scorer of all time, or level with Pelé potentially, but he hasn't been able to get him over the line. Julio Simos says Bruno Fernandes is the type of player that will never win a league title because of the chaos and instability he brings to his team. I just think this is a load of rubbish. Just such rubbish. Bruno is just such a brilliant player. He's becoming underrated at this stage with this sort of opinion about Bruno. It's just nonsense. Like, most chances created in the Premier League since his arrival, or since his first full season in the league, by about 50. He works like a dog off the ball. He sprints all day long. But because of, the way he is on the pitch, with throwing his arms up in the air, being very expressive, being a bit of a moaner, people have this weird conception that he'll never win league titles. He's not actually that good. He is amazing. And it's almost unfortunate for him that he ended up at Manchester United, because if he'd have gone to Liverpool or Man City, or Barcelona or Real Madrid or something, he would definitely be reigning in league titles now. Like, if he'd gone to Italy and gone to a Juventus, or if he'd gone to PSG, he would be like soaked in La Ligas and Liga and titles. But because Manchester United, unfortunately for him, are in a bit of a down period, nothing to do with him, by the way, not his fault, he's not been able to win the Premier League title. But I just don't think the correlation is there. Like, he's not the reason that United haven't been able to win league titles. The reason is the rest of the team haven't been good enough. The management hasn't been good enough. The top level management, including the owners, haven't been good enough. And Man City are existing right now, who are maybe competing with the 2011-ish Barcelona side as one of the greatest club teams ever to exist. Yeah, I think this is just rubbish, Julio. Lewis Reed, Southgate's stance of Tomori is near enough spot on. Wouldn't start him over Stones, Dunk, Gahey or Maguire. I don't think it's spot on. I think Tomori definitely has deserved more playing time, more caps than 3 he's received. I think especially in the 21-22 season where Milan won the league title and he finished as, was he Serie A Defender of the Year? He was certainly in the Serie A team of the season when he was an absolute monster for them. He really should have got an awful lot more game time, in my opinion. Now, I still think he's slightly better than Mark Gahey, definitely in a better period than Harry Maguire, no doubt there. And him versus Dunk, I think they offer slightly different things. Tomori offers far more athleticism. Lewis Dunk probably offers better passing ability, as we've seen with Brighton this season. I think it's a tough call, but I think either way, 3 caps, not enough. Finally, we've got Football Himu, who says Luis Diaz is the best left winger in the Premier League. I think he has the ability to be. I don't think he is. I think only once in his professional career Luis Diaz has started over 20 league games. He's 26 now. And the season that he did manage to start over 20 league games was when it was split half and half. And obviously he joined Liverpool in the second half of the season. He put up monstrous numbers that year. But he did have injury problems last year. He's had injury problems in the past. He's obviously a phenomenal player and extremely scary to play against. But right now, Gabriel Martinelli is coming off the back of a 15-goal season at 22 years old, where pretty much everything on the left-hand side flows through him in terms of attacking output. He's incredibly frightening. Marcus Rashford's coming off the back of a season where he scored 30 goals. We haven't seen those numbers yet from Diaz. We've seen him twice now from Rashford in 1920 and last season. I think Karim Mitoma as well has to be in the conversation here. If Karim Mitoma was playing for Liverpool, I think he would be starting over Diaz right now, especially off the back of last season where he was so frightening. And you've got Jack Grealish, who's coming off the back of a treble win, whilst being an incredibly influential member of the side, despite the fact, his goal and assist numbers aren't off the scale. His importance to Manchester City in a treble win cannot be understated. So I think you've probably got 4 left wingers ahead of him in the league right now. So for me, he makes the top 5 left wingers in the Premier League. He's not the best. Okay, there we have it. If you enjoyed this video, then let me know in the comments below and I'll do it again in the future for more football Twitter opinions. Hit the like button while you're down there. Hit subscribe. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. We'll see you later. Goodbye.